Marcus adjusted the strap of his worn leather bag as he stepped into the narrow airplane aisle, carefully balancing the weight of his sleeping daughter in his arms. Ava's head rested against his chest, her braids slightly undone from a long day of travel. Her pink backpack dangled from his shoulder, brushing against passing seats as impatient passengers shifted around them. The cabin smelled faintly of recycled air and coffee, and the low hum of overhead vents blended with murmured complaints. Marcus paused near their row, scanning seat numbers while trying not to wake Ava. She had cried herself to sleep at the gate after missing a nap, and the last thing he wanted was another meltdown in a crowded plane. He reached for the overhead bin, moving as carefully as possible, when a sharp voice cut through the noise. "Sir, you need to sit down immediately." Marcus turned to see a flight attendant standing close, arms crossed, eyes fixed on him. He nodded calmly. "I'm just putting my bag up," he said quietly. "My daughter's asleep." The attendant sighed loudly, tapping her tablet. "You're holding up Orden. We don't have time for this." "I understand," Marcus replied, shifting Ava gently so her head wouldn't fall back. "Just a second, please." The attendant stepped closer, her tone rising. "Sir," I said now. Heads turned. Marcus felt the familiar pressure crawl up his spine, that tight awareness of being watched, measured, judged. He kept his voice steady. "Please don't yell," he said. "She's just a child." The sound came without warning. A sharp crack echoed through the cabin as the attendant's hand struck Marcus across the face. It wasn't the pain that froze him, but the shock. Ava jolted awake, screaming in terror, her arms tightening around his neck. Marcus staggered slightly, instinctively curling his body inward to shield her. Gasps erupted around them. Someone dropped a phone. Another passenger whispered, "Oh my God." Marcus stared at the attendant, disbelief flooding his eyes. His cheek burned, but his heart pounded harder at Ava's cries. "It's okay," he whispered, rocking her gently. "Daddy's here. You're safe." The attendant straightened her uniform, voice loud and commanding. This passenger became aggressive and refused crew instructions. She announced, "He assaulted me." Marcus felt the words hit harder than the slap. He looked around the cabin, searching faces. Some passengers avoided his gaze, others stared openly, uncertain. Ava sobbed into his shoulder, shaking. "That's not true," Marcus said, his voice low but firm. "I didn't touch you. You hit me." The attendant scoffed. "I would never do that," she said sharply. Crew members rushed forward, speaking over one another. A supervisor was called. Marcus stood still, afraid that any movement would be twisted into guilt. Ava clung to him, her small fingers digging into his jacket as if afraid he might disappear. A man near the aisle frowned. "I saw it," he said hesitantly. She slapped him. The attendant shot him a glare. "Sir, stay out of it." Another voice spoke up, then another. She did hit him. He was holding his kid. The air shifted, slowly, as truth found allies. Security arrived, their presence heavy. Marcus was escorted off the plane with Ava still in his arms. The jet bridge felt cold and hollow, the noise of the cabin fading behind them. Ava's cries softened into hiccups as Marcus sat on a metal bench, whispering comfort while his hands trembled. Time stretched painfully. Statements were taken. The attendant repeated her version, confident but tense. Marcus spoke calmly, describing exactly what happened, refusing to embellish or shrink himself. Eventually, the supervisor returned. Her expression was serious, eyes thoughtful. "Several passengers confirmed your account," she said quietly. "The attendant has been removed from duty." Marcus exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Relief mixed with exhaustion, but the weight in his chest remained. Ava looked up at him with red eyes. "Are we back?" she asked softly. "No," Marcus said, brushing her cheek with his thumb. "We didn't do anything wrong." They were rebooked on a later flight. As they waited, passengers passed by, some offering small nods of support, others silent. Marcus focused on Ava, on keeping her calm, on staying upright in a moment that could have broken him. He didn't know yet that videos were already spreading, that strangers would debate his dignity online. Right now, all he knew was that something had changed, something heavy and lasting, and that he would carry this moment with him long after the bruise faded. The second flight boarded quietly, almost eerily so. Marcus noticed every detail now, every glance from crew members, every shift of tone. He carried Ava with the same care, but his shoulders felt heavier, burdened by memory. This time, no one rushed him. No one raised their voice. The aisle cleared naturally, as if respect had suddenly become policy. They took their seats near the window. Ava curled up against him, exhausted but calmer, her thumb brushing the sleeve of his jacket. Marcus fastened her seatbelt carefully, then his own, forcing his hands to stop shaking. Outside, the runway lights blurred as evening settled in. As the plane taxied, Marcus replayed the incident again, uninvited, the sound of the slap, the collective gasps, the way the accusation had come so easily. He wondered how often the truth lost simply because no one spoke, how many people walked away carrying silence instead of justice. Ava stirred. "Daddy," she whispered, "are you sad?" Marcus hesitated. Honesty mattered. "A little," he admitted, "but I'm okay." She thought about that, then nodded, satisfied. Children accepted truths without decoration. Marcus wished adults could do the same. When the plane lifted into the sky, Ava finally slept, her breathing slow and steady. Marcus stared out the window at the darkening clouds, feeling suspended between anger and resolve. He didn't want revenge. He wanted acknowledgement. He wanted the world to understand that dignity shouldn't require witnesses. By the time they landed, his phone vibrated relentlessly. Messages flooded in from friends, co-workers, distant relatives. Someone had sent a link, a video. He didn't watch it yet. He wasn't ready to see himself frozen in someone else's outrage. At home, the quiet felt unreal. Marcus tucked Ava into bed, smoothing her hair until her breathing deepened. She looked peaceful, untouched by the weight he carried. He stayed there longer than necessary, anchoring himself to the simple rise and fall of her chest. Later, alone in the living room, Marcus finally watched the video. The angle was shaky, the sound imperfect, but the truth was undeniable. He saw himself standing still, holding his child, absorbing the moment without retaliation. The comments scrolled endlessly. Support, rage, denial, praise, hate. He closed the app. The next morning, his supervisor called. "Take the day," she said gently. "We've got you." Marcus thanked her, surprised by how much that meant. Too often, silence followed incidents like this. Support felt unfamiliar, almost fragile. News outlets picked up the story. The airline released a statement expressing regret, promising investigation. Marcus declined interview requests. He didn't want to become a headline. He wanted to remain a father, a man, not a symbol others could argue over. Days passed. Ava returned to school. Marcus returned to work. Life resumed its shape, but not its innocence. He noticed things more now. The way people stiffened. The way authority spoke differently depending on who stood before them. Awareness settled in, heavy but clarifying. One evening, Ava came home with a drawing. 2 stick figures held hands beneath a large airplane. "That's us," she said proudly. "And that's when you kept me safe." Marcus swallowed hard. "I'll always keep you safe," he said. Weeks later, a letter arrived. Not corporate, personal. The supervisor wrote about accountability, about change, about regret. That training came too late for that moment. Marcus folded the letter carefully. It didn't erase what happened, but it mattered that someone tried. The attendant was terminated. Policies were reviewed. Marcus read the updates quietly, without celebration. Justice didn't feel loud. It felt still. One night, Ava asked, "Why do some people think you're scary?" Marcus took his time answering. "Sometimes people see stories instead of people," he said, "and sometimes they're wrong." "Are you scary?" she asked. He smiled softly. "No," she smiled back, reassured. That was enough. Months later, they flew again. Different airline, different city. Marcus felt the tension before boarding, the memory tightening his chest. Ava sensed it and squeezed his hand. "It's okay," she said confidently. "I'm here." Marcus laughed quietly, surprised by the role reversal. Together, they stepped into the aisle. This time, it was just an aisle. No echoes, no accusations, just movement toward a destination. As the plane climbed, Marcus closed his eyes. He didn't forget what happened. He never would. but he understood it differently now. Strength wasn't in shouting, it wasn't in striking back, it was in standing still when the world expected you to fall. And in that quiet understanding, Marcus felt something rare. Not victory, not peace, exactly, but dignity, intact, carried forward, ready to be taught, remembered, and passed on. In the weeks that followed, Marcus noticed how the world reacted differently once the noise faded. At first there were messages every hour, strangers offering support, some sharing their own stories, others projecting anger he never asked for. Then the attention thinned, drifting to the next outrage. What remained was quieter and heavier, the part no camera captured. Marcus returned fully to routine, but routine no longer felt neutral. Standing in lines, entering offices, boarding buses, he became aware of his posture, his tone, the deliberate calm he carried like a shield. It wasn't fear exactly. It was calculation, the understanding that one misunderstood moment could rewrite his day. Ava changed too, though more subtly. She asked more questions. She noticed rules. She noticed who enforced them. One afternoon, while waiting at a store, she whispered, "That man looks angry." Marcus followed her gaze. The man wasn't angry. He was tired. Marcus knelt beside her. "Sometimes faces lie," he said gently. "We don't decide who people are from one look." She nodded, absorbing it with the seriousness only children bring to lessons they don't yet fully understand. At school, a teacher asked Ava to draw something she admired. She drew Marcos, standing tall, holding her hand. When Marcos saw it taped to the fridge later, something tightened behind his ribs. He hadn't realized how closely she had been watching him, how deeply that moment on the plane had settled into her understanding of safety. One evening, Marcus attended a small community meeting after a neighbor invited him. People wanted to talk about accountability, about shared responsibility, about what it meant to speak up. Marcus didn't plan to say anything, but when eyes turned toward him, he stood. His voice was steady, unreasoned. He spoke about witnesses, about how truth needed more than cameras. It needed people willing to be uncomfortable. The room was quiet when he finished, not heavy, respectful. Afterward, a young man approached him. "I froze once," he said. "I saw something wrong and didn't say anything." Marcus nodded. "Next time," he replied simply. That was enough. Months passed. The incident became something Marcus could talk about without feeling the echo in his chest. Not because it mattered less, but because it had found its place. It became part of his story instead of the center of it. On Ava's birthday, they flew again to visit family. She wore headphones too big for her ears and kicked her feet happily as they boarded. Marcus smiled, tension loosening. The flight attendant greeted them warmly, kneeling to Ava's level. "Is this your first flight?" she asked kindly. Ava grinned. "No," she said proudly. Marcus watched closely, ready if needed. It wasn't. As the plane lifted, Ava pressed her face to the window. "We're so high," she said in awe. Marcus nodded. "Higher than fear," he replied before thinking. She laughed, not understanding, but feeling it anyway. Later, as clouds passed beneath them, Marcus reflected on the strange truth of it all. The worst moment of his journey had revealed the best of him. Not because he endured pain, but because he refused to let it define his response. He knew the world hadn't changed overnight. He knew fairness still depended too often on witnesses and luck. But he also knew something else now. That dignity could survive impact. That calm could be louder than violence. That his daughter had learned something powerful without being taught directly. When the plane landed, Ava squeezed his hand. "That was a good flight," she said. Marcus smiled. It was, not because nothing happened, but because everything that mattered held steady. And as they walked into the terminal together, Marcus understood that some journeys weren't about where you landed. They were about who you remained when the world tested you and who was watching closely, learning how to stand.